Welcome to the Craftsman Podcast, where we want to help build people who love better, live better, and leave the world better through raw and honest conversations.
Let's go.
Welcome to episode 2, everybody, of the Craftsman Podcast. I have pulled a fast one on my wife, and we are recording together. Sorry.
That wasn't supposed to happen.
It wasn't supposed to happen, but you know what was interesting is everybody was like, you guys are so good together. So I thought, you know what? Especially this particular topic, I thought it would be great for us to talk about because we both have...
Because we're good at failing?
I think, yes, we are good at failing. We have a lot to talk about.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think it's fun that we get to do it together. So I'm sorry that you didn't want to, but I appreciate you doing it anyway.
There's a lot of things that I don't, always want to do, but they end up being really good. So
They do it. They do. And I think we'll have a good time doing it. So we actually got to talking about this last night about failure and the church failing and why that's a problem for the world. So we can get there. But first, I thought it would be helpful. We had an interesting week.
We did have an interesting week, kind of a whirlwind week.
Well, why don't you tell them about it?
We became, Mimi and PJ, we became grandparents.
Up top. We did.
We're now in the season of grandparenting.
What did my brother say? He said, hey, call me grandpa.
Yeah, you don't look like a grandpa. I think PJ fits better.
I like PJ. Papa Johnny.
Papa Johnny.
And Mimi. That's good.
PJ also goes for Pastor Johnny. Pastor Johnny, Papa Johnny.
That's good. Yeah. I like it.
We welcomed Hazel Grace last Wednesday.
She's pretty cute, isn't she?
She's pretty perfect. It's kind of fun to watch your kid become a mom.
It's crazy. I was telling my mom today, which a whole nother, that's not for this podcast. Yeah. But I was like, Mom, you're a great grandma. She goes, that's crazy, because she was asking about the baby.
Yeah.
So.
She's pretty perfect.
She is. It's pretty great. The story that's written for us, or the story that we get to live, isn't always what we expect. Mm-hmm. Like, we both know that from our stories. And I think that's the glory of knowing God and His grace. As you've talked many times about beauty from ashes and how He takes the broken parts and makes something really incredible,
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I never thought, what was it, 20 years ago when I got out of my mess, that I'd be sitting here with a pretty little granddaughter out of all of it. So it's pretty cool.
And I think to value life, it doesn't matter the way the story's written, but that we understand the valuable parts of life, which is that God created us in His image. And it's not like there's no caveat or qualifiers for how He made us, Yeah. So this little
life
girl
has purpose.
That's exactly right.
She has purpose.
So anyways, for everybody who's wondering, yes, we had a granddaughter. Well, we didn't have her, but we now are grandparents.
Emma had her. Emma did all of the hard work, but yeah, super proud of her.
Yeah.
She's an amazing mom.
She is. She's going to do an incredible job. So let's get into the meat of our conversation about failure. I had some questions that I thought would be fun just to kind of can ease our way in a little bit.
Is it going to ease us into it, or is it going to shut the conversation down?
Well, it depends. I think that we're going to find out.
Okay, let's see.
This one is not necessarily about failure, but I for whatever reason, I was fascinated with the answer to this question. Okay. What's the worst nickname you've ever been given?
Oh,
you have some bad ones?
No, I think it's something you called me probably when we first got married.
Oh, I did. We won't even.
You called me Lenny, which was, I was like, no, because it was a old boyfriend. And I was like, it doesn't go well. I don't think you can call me that.
I remember that day. I remember, what?
I think there's been a couple of moments in our marriage where you've gotten that look from me. Not very much, but just nope, I think one time, that's enough. You don't ever have to do that or say that again.
I remember when I called you that, I remember distinctly the response was very clearly, don't ever call me that again.
probably.
Yeah.
It just was weird.
No, it was good.
Yeah. But I don't know. I think that was the only, I don't know that
That and the handlebar mustache.
yeah, don't ever do a handlebar mustache again.
For those of you, to let you in on the joke, I showed up at the airport with one of the students that we had picking up Lindsay from the airport, and I was like, oh, it'd be hilarious. I'm going to shave a handlebar mustache, but it wasn't like a little one. It was the one where the chops.
Like a gross. It was gross.
Like the chops went all the way down, like to my neck.
Well, and it didn't even fit you. It didn't fit who you are.
No,
it just looked weird. And you showed up in like a t-shirt and board shorts, like you typically dress. And it just doesn't look. It just didn't look good. It just didn't look right.
Again, your response was very distinct, and I realized that I should never do that again. In fact, you said, I went to give you a kiss, and you're like, nope, don't think so, Buster. And you said, yeah, I think your exact words were, don't ever do that again.
And please go home and shave it.
So I shaved that, and I've never actually had a handlebar mustache since.
See, you learned.
I did learn.
All it took was one time.
See, look. when you want to like take care of one another, you do have a tendency to learn the lessons. Yeah. How about First Lady? Is that a good nickname?
No.
You like that?
No. Audie and Jared. No.
There was
no.
This is one of my favorites, only because you're just so not into it. Anyway, sometimes they call pastors' wives First Lady, and I think it's hilarious.
Yeah. Definitely not a first lady.
No,
not a first lady.
So, okay, I've had this thought for a long time. I wrote this down. I'm going to read it how I wrote it because I think it'll couch the conversation. There's a statement that was given by NASA. There was somebody in NASA. I can't remember his name. I should have done my homework better. I have his name somewhere. And this is the famous failure's not an option. Right. And I got to thinking about this. I think that statement, it permeates both our lives as people, as Christians. It goes into the corporate business world. Failure's not an option. And I got to thinking about this at one point some years ago. And I was like, well, it's not an option, but it is inevitable.
Because we're human beings.
Right.
It's gonna happen at some point.
And I think that we don't always allow one another to be it's inevitable that we fail. I think sometimes we say, oh, well, no, it's not an option. Like, you're not allowed to fail. I'm not allowed to fail. They're not allowed to fail. We're not allowed to fail. So I wrote this. It says,
but is it that we're not allowed to fail? Because I think sometimes not that we're okay with it, but we want other people to accept our failure.
No, that's fair. I do. I think maybe a double standard.
Yeah. Yes.
Like, I want grace, but I don't want to give grace.
Right. Yeah.
Man, we'll have to get into that a little deeper. So I wrote this. It says, we say failure is not an option. However, it is inevitable. Mm-hmm. And how we respond to our failure and the failure of others, it says more about our faith in God than we know. We are called to respond with grace, forgiveness, and patience. Any expectation of perfection from anyone other than Jesus is a temptation from the devil and should be treated as such. And I think the idea for me when I wrote this, it was this idea saying, okay, when we respond to our failure with shame and condemnation, and we become either legalistic or completely loose, and we just do whatever we want, like give up. That's not okay, right? Or failure in others, where we respond to people in a way that's not consistent with how God has dealt with our failure. Mm-hmm. And that tells us and other people what we really believe about God.
It speaks, I think, very loudly to other people. About even who God is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and there's two different, you have to kind of separate out too. I was thinking about this earlier today. Christians who like have a relationship with Christ, their response to failure is going to be so different than people who don't have a relationship with Christ. Meaning, with failure, I think you can recognize, I messed up. There's a softness there, maybe not. Mm-hmm. But usually, you would like to see that. Okay, maybe there's a softness there. Maybe there's a, feeling maybe convicted, or just that soft, like repent. You're sorry for it,
right?
versus like we also want the same response for people in the world. Like it's not going to be the same.
Yeah.
It's not going to be the same.
I wonder what your experience has been. I know that I have this idea sometimes, like you figure somebody who knows Jesus, who's experienced forgiveness, would be so quick to offer it. Mm-hmm. And I think at times I find in myself and in others that maybe we forget.
I was just going to say, I think we forget
the measure of forgiveness and grace we've been given.
I think the longer time has gone by, it's easier for us to forget. I think it's that you don't want to live in this constant place of like, you don't want to live in the shame and guilt of the things that we've done. But I think that to remember what has been forgiven is important.
Yeah.
And especially in dealing with others.
Yeah, there's this story that Jesus tells, and I know you and I have talked about this a lot. This comes up a lot for me. This parable, it tends to couch a lot of my perception, because I think the idea that if we can remember how God deals with us in a lot of situations, it translates to parenting, it translates to our marriage, it translates to our jobs, on the field, all the places that we find ourselves. If we can remember and understand how God has dealt with us in our mess, our failures, our mess ups, our sin, whatever, then that can help us kind of direct us how to manage other people.
But I think we also have to be confident in like his love and the security of knowing that he's forgiven those failures, because I think that dictates how we respond to it.
Yeah, if we're not confident,
if we're not confident that we've even been forgiven, I think that dictates how we deal with failure in other people, because I think a lot of times that insecurity in us comes out.
Yeah. So there's this, the parable is the parable of a merciful servant, and it's this guy who goes, and the servants are having to give an account to the master. And this particular servant is in debt way more than he can pay, like $1 million or something like that. And he couldn't pay, so he begged and begged and begged for his life, right? And the master had mercy on him and said, "Look, I'll forgive all of your debt." And then that same servant went out and he found a servant that owed like $5, and he was like, he starts to like strangle him. He's like, give me my money right now, and he freaks out on him, and he is unmerciful even though he's been shown so much mercy. And so he gets in all this trouble and gets put in jail and all those things. So it's like, when we act that way with people, right? So let's take it to something super practical, like at home or in a marriage. Let's start with the marriage. When your spouse isn't perfect.
We don't really deal with this.
Well, you don't. You're perfect. I know that I am not perfect, but do you know what I mean though?
Yeah.
Where we have this expectation that our spouse is never going to mess up. And when they do, we deserve and have the right to make them pay for it or something, Make
them feel it. Like they need to feel.
Yeah. And it's crazy because we forget in those moments that we have been forgiven so much, right?
Like over and over and over.
Yeah, I think.
And over and over and over.
Yeah. Or our kids. So think about like kids. This is really hard. As a parent, you want to parent right, you want to be right, but we're not always right. And we also, I think it's more honest to say that we get frustrated and disappointed with our kids.
Yeah.
Because it says something about us, I guess, if they're not doing it right.
I think that's a lot. I mean, I'll fully admit that, that I think a lot of times the reason we want things to be a certain way with our kids is because we're afraid of what it would, how it reflects us as parents.
Yeah.
What people would think of us as parents. Did you do things right? Oh, if they did that, you must not have done this the right way, or you must not have had this conversation. And we forget that they themselves are human beings with minds of their own.
Yeah.
And free wills. And, and the failure, like we all have it, like thinking about just in our own home with our kids. I'm not going to throw our kids under the bus at all, but
we have great kids.
I think in, I don't know. I even have a hard time. It is failure. I just have a hard time saying it like that because I think sometimes out of those situations, those have been some of the greatest conversations we've had. And I think the times where we've seen, I think, God move in the biggest ways too.
Yeah.
And is it failure if there's growth?
Right.
And even if it's just a tiny bit of growth, it's still growth.
Yeah, and the failure is, I think it's just important to kind of start at the right spot. What do we expect of other people? Do you expect your kids to put on a person the expectation of perfection is ridiculous?
Well, the pressure.
Yeah, like, okay.
We can't live with that. We can't live with that kind of pressure.
What do you mean you got a B? What do you mean you got a C? Oh my gosh, why don't you have straight A's? And then creating the environment where then there's this unspoken expectation of never messing up. We already struggle in this culture with perfectionism and the need to present ourselves a certain way. And I don't know how, it's not godly. And I think for people who live in the world that don't know Jesus, have not experienced the forgiveness that comes from God, I can understand you're trying to earn your value somehow. But what does it say to our spouse or our kids or our friends or the church when there is no room for humanity, for our, mess ups?
Right.
What is, I was curious, what's been your experience with failure? Kind of what's your relationship to failure in your life and the things that you've learned about it, or maybe some of the things that, I don't know, even that God has taught you over the last few years, but maybe how you grew up?
I was always pretty hard on myself. And I don't know that I don't think it was, I don't know if any one person did that. I think some of it is just even my makeup of wanting, I think just having that outward. I wanted people to accept me. I wanted people to see me a certain way. And so that pressure to, even though I wasn't living, I wasn't living the perfect life, but on the outside, it's definitely going to look that way.
Sure.
I also just didn't feel safe talking about it or saying it's not easy to just kind of put it all out there. Oh my gosh, these are the areas I'm struggling in. I have failed miserably in this area. And so I never knew how to do that. And then I think because of, my situation, being a single mom, divorced, and all of that, I left that feeling like a failure. And that's a weird one because I left my first marriage feeling like a failure, but also feeling like, yes, I finally got out of this. And so kind of those feeling both of those emotions. And then I think that carried into as being a single mom, and then not even as a single mom, just being a mom of kids, feeling like my failures affected my kids. And so how do I cover that up? How do I mask that? And then what I found was then there wasn't a lot of grace for mess ups with my girls because then I had to then I was faced with they're struggling with this because of, it was just like an unhealthy cycle of you see this behavior in your kids and you're dealing with the behavior instead of the root, but you're dealing with it in an unhealthy way because you're feeling your own insecurities.
Oh, isn't that brutal that the measure of insecurity that we feel and really trying to get to a place of confidence of our own salvation, our own mercy, like the fact that God actually loves us. Yeah. Like he loves us. And there's no qualifiers for that. Right. There's literally nothing that we can do to increase the love that God has for us. Right. And there's nothing we can do that would diminish his love for us. But yet we still try. Oh, constantly.
But we try because look at our relationships with each other.
We're always trying to earn it, right?
Most of the time, that love is earned.
Yeah, if I do this, I'll get this.
And think about relationships, there's relationships that have failed because, you didn't do this or you didn't meet these expectations, it's severed. Now, some relationship they need to be
some need to be severed, sure,
because they're not healthy. But think about, relationships that you've had or experiences you've had with people. A lot of times it is based on our performance.
We have grown up in this performance-based acceptance setting. It's built in. And that's straight from the enemy. Like the devil has been really good at creating a system where if you do this, you earn that. And this is like the American way also.
But going back to our kids, look at the culture that they're in. We live in the South. And so there is a lot of pressure. School is super competitive. Sports are super competitive, all the things. So our kids live with all of this pressure. And I think for a lot of them, they believe if I don't get straight A's, if I'm not in the top of my class, I'm not this or that, I'm never going to college, I'm not going to amount to anything, I'm not going to have a good job, I'm not going to be successful, all of these things.
Yeah.
So they're being raised in this culture of performance. There is no room to mess up or my whole life is going to be over. I'm not going to be successful. I'm not going to have these I'm not going to be able to do this, this, and this. It's just not. It's not an option.
Well, and then there's no outlet. It's like, how do we break out of that? Well, in our conversation last night with our friends, bringing it to the church a little bit, because it's one thing to say, well, this is the setting in the world, and all competition isn't bad, and all performance isn't bad, unless it is for the purpose of earning and gaining love,
right,
or the acceptance of your parents, or the acceptance of your spouse.
Right.
And something that I think it has been coming to light, we see recently, we see leaders in the church, we call it falling. For those of you who are not believers, somebody who falls is somebody who's supposed to be in leadership or supposed to be godly, and then their sin is revealed, their mess ups are revealed, and they can't keep going the way they're going. They can't serve the way they are. And some of those, I understand why we do that. But then it's always such a surprise for people when a pastor say their sin is revealed. And I always ask this question when it happens. Why is it such a shock when a pastor is revealed to be a sinner? And why did they not feel the ability to let that out earlier in a place where they could continue to grow? Because as a pastor, it is my job to care for people as they sin and sanctify and try to work their salvation out with the Lord. And it's meant to be done with grace and mercy and forgiveness and understanding, right? People sin, and that's usually when I talk to them. I messed up. This is going on. How do we go forward? And in grace and mercy, say, look, this is what God wants for you. I want to help you get there. Your life's not over, so forth and so on. Yeah. But a pastor doesn't have the option because their ability to lead is questioned, or their, I don't know, take your pick, what it is.
Well, and I think what you said too is for a lot of pastors nowadays, I mean, their title is tied to like their job security too. I mean, you're supporting a family off of that. There's a lot of pressure in that in and of itself.
Sure. So it's like, okay, if I reveal my humanity, right, there's this really weird tension. If I reveal my humanity, and I'm not speaking just for me, I'm just in general, the kind of this space of pastoring. If a pastor reveals their humanity, then their family pays for it. Their kids pay for it, because we have developed an environment where we elevate pastors. And so as goes the pastor, so goes the church, instead of as goes Christ, so goes the church. And the pastor should be able to use their gifts of shepherding and teaching and pastoring with the people to go towards Christ. Yeah. And when this person feels that much pressure, when a teenager feels the pressure to be perfect, they're not going to be honest. They're going to isolate themselves, and isolation will lead to failure every time. And this is the story that you hear from leaders, whether it's a CEO in a company, they're like, oh my gosh, this happened, they can't be CEO, or a pastor can't be a pastor because they were having inappropriate relationships.
But anybody, you think of even like in a marriage, husband and wife, if there's something that they don't feel like they can come out and say, when you become isolated, you have isolated yourself, and you've allowed space for the enemy to really get in there and just start telling you some major lies.
Well, I think that it means that we have to create a space, like in a marriage. For me as a husband, it's my job to love you the way that God has loved me first, to create a space where you feel safe enough to communicate the ugly parts too, and say, I'm struggling with this. You should know or expect that if I'm doing my job right, that whatever you tell me will be met with grace. There might be some tough road ahead, but that you would know the first response would be understanding and empathy to say, oh, your mess is like my mess. And because I've gotten forgiveness from God and mercy, and he's not let me go yet, you can expect that you will find mercy from me and that I will not let you go.
Right. I was listening to a podcast this morning on a different, it was talking about, it was a husband and a wife, and it was talking about a failure in their marriage. And he was sharing how he even had accountability, partners. Like, we're talking about this, like, do we have people that we can share these things with? What's their response? But he was talking about that over the years, he had accountability partners, but they sat and they studied scripture together, which is great. But that's all they did. Like, they were in the word together, and
which is valuable.
Which is valuable, but it was for to gain knowledge. And so he was saying, I had these, because the question was asked, when you were going through this, did you have people that walked through this with you? And he said, I thought I did. We met every single week. We'd sit, we'd open the word, we'd sit and we'd study in great detail scripture. But he said, but we never applied it to our life. There was never space to know each other. So we studied it for the head knowledge, but there was never space for the relational. And I thought that was really good.
Yeah.
Here this man, he was an elder in a church. He was, kind of probably put on a pedestal. Their family was looked at as like the perfect Christian family. And yet he struggled with this for over 10 years.
That's
and
heartbreaking.
People that he met with every single week had no idea, because they never talked about that. Like, they never talked about those deep things that we struggle with in life. But anyways, in the conversation, he goes on to say that, he finally did admit it to his wife, and he sought counseling. He met with a counselor for over 5 years. And he said, even in those 5 years, he still never revealed everything to that counselor, because he still was concerned with how the counselor would perceive him, how he would see him. So he gave him just enough to kind of deal with it on the surface, but not all of it, because he still was so concerned with, how is this person going to look at me?
I think that's the fundamental issue of, like, the why behind the way we operate. If you believe that somebody will love you anyway, that somebody will love you in spite of your sin, you will have a healthy, dynamic, open, transparent relationship. If you question even a little bit, or from experience, if you've offered that, if you've offered your ugly parts and it was met with resistance or a discomfort, because here's the thing is that transparency breeds the need for transparency. Like, I have to trust that you can handle my transparency, right? If I'm going to tell you something, it's a lot of people are like, well, if they're transparent, they're going to want me to be transparent, and I'm not willing. And so they shy away. So if a person risks it and says, I'm going to offer myself, I'm going to bear the ugly parts, and it's met with condemnation, or it's met with doubt, or it's met with fear, that tells us that we can't do that.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is that with God, this is the wonderful reality of our relationship with God, is that he already knows our ugly parts and loves us anyway. Yeah. But having confidence in that is really hard.
Do you ever think about that? I think about that a lot.
Which part?
just thinking about, like, he already knows.
That's a little scary.
But he does.
Yes.
He already knows. He knows all of our mess ups up to this point.
Yeah.
And he knows the ones that we still haven't, that haven't happened yet. And yet we still try to.
Think about if you're listening or watching, or even us here, think about the things that you have never told anybody. Mm-hmm. Think about those things that you have held on to and said, nobody can know about this because I hate the way it makes me look. I don't like the way I feel about it. Nobody could love me if they knew this.
Yeah.
I have them, you have them, everybody has them. And the reality is that God not only knows them, but in Christ is intimately acquainted. It says that he bore the sin of the whole world. I'm going to start preaching because I get excited about this because it's so important. He didn't just bear it like in a over there sense. He felt, it says that the weight of the world, the sin of the world was on Christ. And it says that he has been tempted with everything we've been tempted with, yet was without sin. Mm-hmm. So he's not just knowledgeable about it, he has felt it. And experienced it. And God loves us anyway.
Yeah.
He, in spite of our sin, he said, no, that's not enough for me to be chased away. Right. You can't chase me away with your ugliness, like your sin and the gross parts of you.
Right.
And I find that the more confident I become, I'm maybe so passionate about this particular thing right now is because I hate failing. Failure makes me scared. It hits that part of me that diminishes my value. I feel unlovable, right? I feel.
But is that because of how people have dealt with it? Because I still go back to even if we fail. Do you feel like those are like the times that you've experienced the biggest growth?
I mean,
and also like an opportunity for God to reveal himself to you in even a different way too.
Ultimately, yes.
Yeah.
But I think the process to get there is the hard part.
You think about even people who have failed in business ventures, they've taken like huge risks.
Yeah.
They may have failed, but along the way, they've also learned something for the next go around.
Yep.
They can say, okay, well, this didn't work. This failed, but now I know, and now I can do this. And I think the same goes with anything.
Yeah.
I think it's also our attitude in it.
Yeah. And where's your trust lie, right? Because the opposite side of failure is like the faith that we have, and then in whom do we have faith?
Yeah.
Because I think you're right. It can't just be about how we fail and all those things.
No, because I think it helps refine us too.
It does. But it requires faith in something bigger than what we can accomplish, right?
Yes. Well, it has nothing to do with us.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with us.
But because again, it goes to who is the unmerciful servant about? It's about their relationship with God and his ability to make new, right, dead things.
Yeah.
Gosh, there's so much to talk about here. But I think that it's important that I always want to kind of round it out with hope, because there's hope in this. I have for a long time lived in the condemnation of my failure. Yeah. And very recently, I feel like God has really ripped me out of this. I'm going to call it humble legalism. I've been thinking about it. Truthfully, we call it humility or self-deprecation can turn into this humble legalism, where we are actually living in condemnation and we're not living free in Christ, operating out of faith in God. And I think it's really, really, really important to trust the work of the cross, to really trust the forgiveness of God, and know that it doesn't matter. Somebody told me this once. It was Scott told me, you can't out-sin the cross. Mm-hmm. It's what happened on the cross is bigger and more than anything we can lay at the foot of it. Yeah. What is the most profound thing? And we'll end with, I think, this question. If you could say from your experience, with your own failure and with how God has managed that with you, what would you tell somebody who's struggling with their own failure, their own sin maybe, or their own mess ups, or their difficulty with getting, understanding the mercy? What would you tell somebody
that's struggling with that?
Yeah.
That it's not too big. That it's not impossible.
Yeah. Hope's real, huh?
Like hope it is real. Yeah. And like that, it's different. Like, there's people I talk to that are not in the church at all, but that same hope is available to them.
Yeah. I know who you're talking about. You should tell them who you're talking about.
Yeah. The girls, I get to, visit with girls on the street that are actively being trafficked, and they live in a life of just absolute hopelessness and
the guilt and shame, the
guilt
cycle
and shame, all the things. And so, the same hope that we have, it's available to them as well. And I think just holding on to, like, we haven't gone too far.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, we haven't gone too far. Like, he already died on the cross. Like, it's already been done. It's already been done. It's finished for us.
Yeah.
So all we have to do is grab onto that and hold on to that. So I think that,
I think I want to encourage everybody in this, that you will not be perfect. You will inevitably mess it up. You will disappoint somebody. You are going to let people down. I'm going to let people down. I am not going to be able to live up to the expectations of others.
Do you think that as Christians, what do you think we show, like, the world? Do you think that this is something that people in the world struggle with? This is why they maybe struggle with?
I do. I think it's because
our inability to fail.
Yeah. We, as the church, we don't fail well. And here's what I mean by that. We don't know how to own it.
Yeah.
So people know we're not perfect.
Right.
They see it all the time.
Right.
And they stay away from God because we as Christians are poor reflections and everybody else sees it but us. And I think my greatest encouragement that I try to tell myself is, and I've seen this happen over and over, when you mess up, and you mess up and people know you mess up, instead of trying to cover it up and explain it away and be defensive, I found the best way to interact with that is to completely run towards and say, you know what? You're right. I'm not supposed to be doing this, but I know God still loves me, and I'm sorry that I'm a bad reflection, but know that God is not like me, right? Following God is always the right thing. And God is good, and He is holy, and He is merciful, and He is kind. All the things people are looking for are found in God. Yeah. Even if we're not great reflections of that same good God.
Awful reflections of that.
But we have to learn to say, you're right. I'm sorry. I am a bad reflection. Please forgive me.
Right.
Like, do you know how hard those words are?
Right.
I'm wrong. Please forgive me.
Why do you think we're so bad at doing that?
Because we have to admit that we aren't God, that we aren't in control, that we aren't perfect, that we don't have what it takes, that we're not capable, that we don't live up. And it's hard to own that. It's hard to admit that.
Maybe we need, like they have the signs on the front of stores that say open or close. Could we have just a sign that we wear around our neck that we could flip? Failed.
Maybe it's so we don't have to say it.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
That would be good. I'm sorry shirt.
Yeah.
And people ask and go, just in case, it's coming.
What does that mean? Yeah. You're just going to apologize now?
Yeah. It's coming. So I know it and I'm sorry. Yeah. No, I think that's good. I have found that the people who are most honest about that seem to draw people towards Christ a little easier, because they're like, oh, at least they know that they're not perfect.
Right.
Right? Because how many people do you know, like, oh, you're a Christian, you're not perfect, and they get really put off?
Well, and I've had just over the last, several months, we don't air everything out for everybody to know what's going on in our life, but I do think that we're pretty open.
We try
to, so that to kind of squash this idea. And also for our girls not to see, like we've tried, I think, really hard to kind of squash that idea for them, and even them feeling the pressure of, oh, I'm a pastor's kid. I have to be a certain way. I have to act this way. I have to be perfect. I have to do all these things. And I've had several people over the last several months thank us for allowing people into just the mess because of how it's ministered to them, and how and I think we forget that. That is not to pat ourselves on the back, but I think as just but I think too, it's just a reminder for everyone that even our mess and our failures, it can minister to somebody.
It always does.
It always does if we allow it to. Now it's a posture. It's it's our response to it. But I never thought of failure that way. I never thought of people know this actually could minister to them. This could actually bring freedom. This to somebody else. I never thought of it that way. We tend to just draw inward instead of, okay, this is what it is. Okay, Lord, what are you gonna do with this? Like we can admit this is whatever.
What does John says? I must become less. He must become greater. Than Paul says in his interaction with God, he asked God to take away that thorn in his flesh, and God's response was this. He says, Paul, he says, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. When we are at our worst, God shines the brightest because it reveals his glory. It reveals his grand majesty and almighty nature. Yeah. And when we are trying to be strong all the time, and I'm not saying we should live in failure and go, oh, I'm terrible, I'm awful, I suck all the time. That's not what we're asked to do. Right. But when we are touting ourselves as, like the Pharisees did this all the time.
I've got it together.
I am so good. Pharisee and the tax collector, he goes to the Pharisees that go to up to the church, and he's like, oh, God, I'm so glad that you love me and I'm blessed, and I'm so glad I'm not like that guy in the back. And the tax collector, who was a dirty sinner to the culture back then, has his head hanging low and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And he's just owning his stuff. Yeah. So I'm going to challenge everybody to do this. I think this is really important. Risk transparency. Yeah. Now, I know that there's a responsibility of me to say, if you risk it, there's a chance you're going to get hurt. That's the bottom line. If you're going to risk transparency, you risk people not being responsible with it. Yeah. But you can always risk it with God and trust that he's going to love you anyway. Yeah.
And hopefully you have somebody, and if you don't, find somebody, anybody. I mean, even if it is us, but somebody that you can trust with those kind of deep, dark secrets that you've been holding on to.
Yeah. We have experience of lots of failure in our marriage. And
are you airing that now?
No, I'm not specifics, but that's for another podcast maybe. But the reality is of the freedom that comes from it coming out in the open, right? The freedom that comes from loving each other anyway. And the freedom from saying, hey, like, I'll take all your parts. I'll take your good parts. I'll take the outward parts. I'll take the ugly parts.
But then the wins, you get to celebrate even more because you've walked through that.
When you get to be a participant with God of forgiveness and mercy, like when you get to own and kind of go, I got to give somebody mercy today. Yeah. I got to be able to participate with God. I got to be like God today to say, oh, I forgive you. I love you anyway. Yeah. Like, you know how great that is? What an amazing... But that's my favorite part about being a follower of Jesus is that I get to be with him.
You get to be a part of that.
Yes. Yeah. And the freedom that comes over somebody who realizes that you're not done with them just because they're not right and perfect. Yep. So, well, babe, I appreciate the time. Thank you for being honest. Thank you for dealing with my own failure. I did have a couple of questions I didn't get to, which was, what are the things that grind your nerves that I do? Come on, what's one thing? Let's just give them.
How long do I have? I'm just teasing.
What's one of the things? Come on. Besides the snoring.
The snoring is awful. I could do without, but there really isn't this is going to sound.
Come on.
I think when you go too far between haircuts. sounds.
It does. No, you
But
do. It
really-
bothers you. It does.
No, there isn't.
I'm trying to get on a 6-week schedule.
I know you are.
6-week
You are.
schedule.
No,
This last one-
that sounds super petty, but in all seriousness, I don't
funny.
know.
No, they're all little things. Most of them are all little things.
Most of them are all little things
Yeah.
that aren't even worth. I mean, that's just like a
funny.
dumb thing that.
No,
I can
but
laugh
it's so
about.
funny. We do talk about this, and then when I help with laundry, but that's not what we're talking about today.
But when you help with the laundry, and I don't want you to help with the laundry,
That's fair.
That is probably yes.
Well, it's been a good time. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I love you.
I love you too.
Thank you, everybody. Hey, we're looking forward to the next one. We're going to start introducing some phone calls, which will be a lot of fun. We have the opportunity to have people call in maybe and ask some questions along the way.
I will not be on that one.
No, that's okay. I'll reserve that for myself and invite some more friends along. So we have some exciting ones coming up. So please, as always, like, subscribe. You can find us on Spotify, and it always helps us if you follow and leave comments. We try to look at those. So appreciate you guys. Have a good day.
Bye, guys.